Futures trading involves risk and is not suitable for all investors. Content provided in this segment is meant for educational purposes and is not a solicitation to buy or sell commodities.
Hi, it's Steve and Joe from Fresh Agenda, Everag's Global Insights team. And Steve, we're back this week with a bit of a market background leading up to this week's interesting GDT event. A little bit of an overview of EU trade. We'll go through what happened during the auction and then charts of the week.
Okay, so just a bit of a lead up looking here at EEX skim milk futures. They have been sagging last few weeks, but particularly in the last week that's dipped. New Zealand's been following that. It's hard to say who's been leading who, but certainly in Europe the tone is much weaker. The sentiment's a lot weaker on the demand side. EEX butter futures also dipping. We've seen some resistance to the high prices finally start to occur, and that's been going on for a little while, but really seen the futures sag, particularly the front half of that curve through Q4. And we'll look at some comparatives after the GDT results because this gets interesting when you look out further. But a bit more milk around. We had some issues with milk due to the flooding, so there was surplus milk moving around the continent, but I think a lot of this is pushback on very high butter prices. And Joe, in the US?
Yeah, some softer demand sort of coming through this week, Steve, in the CME cheese futures here. You can just see a little bit of growth coming through in the central regions for milk production in those very important cheese producing regions. So milk plus solids, like we keep seeing the milk production is lacking, but solids are actually pretty healthy in the US at the moment. So maybe just a bit more supply and a little weaker demand that's pushing those futures down, Steve.
Over to Europe, some weekly numbers from France and Germany. They come out frequently and they're continuing to show improving output. And as yet, we're seeing little evidence. This is into the week ending the 8th of June, little evidence of those German floods. The milk dipped, the increase dipped a little. But the combined France and Germany output is up 1.5% in that second week of June, and it's 1.1% for the 4 weeks to that week. So you put that against the fact that solids are down, not as much. Then in Germany, the solids are down 0.8%. So that's an impact that erodes that. But in France, they're holding up. So milk and solids are the same. It's other regions of Europe are a lot worse, of course. So when you look, though, at the year-on-year, that is still, it's a small increase. Markets watching this very carefully to see if this is going to be if there is going to be a kick in production because the amount of feed that's around. But those solids are also worried because they're weakening effective output. So interesting to watch what goes on there.
Sure. EU trade, Steve, and overall European trade or trade out of the EU 27 slightly ahead on a milk solids equivalent basis, 3.4% up, just 0.7% up for the 6 months to April. You can just see there in those numbers, Steve, skim milk powder had a bit of a jump in the latest data. Cheese is still growing, reasonably healthy, but fats are way down. So that's a factor clearly of reduced supply, but also a bit of resistance, no doubt, to those very high prices from some of those importing regions. And whey, Southeast Asia, and for a change, China was buying there. And then lactose, Southeast Asia is the key market there. So some interesting stats, pretty good overall in terms of those trends, Steve, for volume.
Yeah, if we're looking at skim milk powder, that jump we talked about there, Joe, and it's the usual, Middle East, North Africa. Middle East has been pretty solid and continuing to buy. But North Africa, with those lumpy volumes of tendered sales of skim milk powder, has probably got a lot to do with that big jump. Last couple of months have been pretty strong. China's still very poor year on year, but the strength of that MENA region is certainly lifted the total quite well.
Yeah, and this is an always interesting one, Steve. These are these contestable markets that we talk about for cheese. So these are the markets where Europe, the US and New Zealand are going head-to-head. And you can just see there that actually Europe has lost a bit of ground to the US. Most of that competition, you would say, would be price-based, Steve, very much so, which may not hold to be the case as the US has had that bit of a cheese price rally. But some interesting shifts in terms of market share there.
Over to the event. And so much went on this time.
So much to see. Overall, the price index was down 0.5% for this event number 358. It's the first fall in the index for 6 events, and sadly, that gutsy little AMF run has finished. 19 events without a fall in price has just been broken, so AMF down this time. The highest butter prices ever for C1 and C3. So the fat space is still very interesting when it comes to GDT, isn't it, Steve?
Yeah, just the small butter volumes on offer, but also maybe this thing that people are just waiting, surely it's going to break, just holding out. But that short-term, those short-term prices are extreme. But the interesting thing, the later delivery stuff surprised me here. Butter and skim milk powder, both sets of results. When you'd expect skim milk powder, those prices got pushed to nearly $3,000 a tonne.
Yes.
Healthy rises at a time when New Zealand will have a lot more product. So maybe it's Christmas buying that's gone on there. I mean, in both cases, I was quite surprised that we saw such strong tone there. Joe, where does this leave us in comparison to others?
Yeah, so just lining up some of the other spot quotes there, and GDT is still the most expensive place to go to buy your butter, well ahead of the comparatives. Skim milk powder overall is pretty much still in line despite that late rally, and cheddar just fell back a little bit this time around, so just a little bit lower than those EU quotes, as you can see there.
In terms of demand, butter demand, obviously that's a ratio of what came to the auction versus what's available. Skim milk powder quite poor. That's the worst we've seen for some time with skim. And Joe, I promise this is the only time I'm going to use these, but this event started weaker but just kicked on. And the average result is quite a puzzling one this time because we had so many. We had a lot of different effects in this result for skim milk powder.
Sure.
Short-term prices down, longer-term up. We had European prices down. We had, it's a mixed bag of outcomes, but overall it was enough to lift the average. Where the buying occurred, China put in one of their worst performance, one of the lowest volumes we've seen. Southeast Asia, however, stepped up in whole milk powder, which was a standout. Not the highest volumes we've seen.
Yep.
Certainly helped save this result at a time when it was needed. Joe, the fats, was such a lot of movement.
Yeah, well, with butter going up and AMF going down, we've seen that premium open up a little bit more again. So still a bargain, AMF. You can do it, little buddy, but that's just opened up again with this interesting result for fats.
So where does it leave us? The forward butter curves are interesting. This gives us a bit more, but that GDT line is lifted way above where we were, way above where New Zealand futures are going forward. It's interesting how this adjusts after this event.
Sure.
Things pretty much line up, but GDT is lined up with the other regions in out to Q4, so they've lined up nicely, but those New Zealand futures know a bit more.
What do they know? And this is an interesting one too, Steve, this butter AMF price comparison.
Yeah, so I've layered AMF here in butter equivalents, so expressing the same terms and comparing, so that's where the New Zealand futures are valuing butter, which is quite interesting. But the gulf out there, when you think about the fact that the EX futures will be well below the comparative cream value, so if AMF is going to travel to Europe, it's most likely later in the year.
Yeah.
Cream price is well above this. The cream multiple is pretty strong at the moment. So there's a wide gap opening up there between the landed AMF cost and European cream. Keep watching that one.
Absolutely.
And for skim milk powder, well, the response to this one's going to be interesting as well. Those GDT results, quite surprising just how strong those later periods are, as we've discussed. The futures curves, pretty well aligned.
They were up till this point, weren't they? Yeah, interesting one.
So chart of the week, Joe, what have you got?
Chart of the week. Well, we've pulled out some of the year-on-year growth trends in retail sales, Steve, and it's just interesting to see that contrast between the food service trends and grocery. Overall, retail sales are a little bit down, but food service weakening in the last set of results for May, but grocery also down, not quite as much as in previous months. And it's just interesting. We've heard a lot about how strong the US economy is, but perhaps people aren't feeling it in the lead up to the presidential election. So we've got some other charts just to put around these findings. And this is what we're seeing with those grocery volumes, certainly for natural cheese. We are seeing that those volumes are improving. There's a chart that we've sourced from our Insights team colleagues, and that's just showing volumes are just a little bit up in June. Just a downward trend in those unit prices, Steve. So just indicating that people trading down to private label or maybe larger packs to save a bit of money. So interesting just to see behind those retail trends, at least for natural cheese. And in terms of that food service piece, we're starting to see a little bit of a kick up in terms of seated diners. So these are the restaurants that actually kind of take bookings and have people seated, more formal types of restaurants. And that 13-week average is just trending up there from being in quite a negative space. And then the fast food QSR segment of the market, that's also trending up. It's been, fairly neutral, slightly positive, but just a little bit stronger in that last sort of data from June. So interesting.
Yeah, I think the interesting stuff when we think of those headline sales where they try to imply volumes by taking sales and removing the inflation effect. This is the more granular data that shows that there's a lot more going on. Trading down is a difficult one to capture in the high level numbers, but this is interesting. I mean, this shows that that low price meal stuff in fast food is starting to work eventually because there've been some fairly aggressive pricings, but it's kicking on. So there is buds of growth.
Bit of traction getting gained there. So
certainly.
Yeah.
That's all from us. Thanks for watching. We'll be back next week.